The other part of that is a potential tension between a rights approach and a developmental approach. Now, I don't think they necessarily are. I think they are synergistic, but I keep thinking that youth work starts much more from a rights approach and then has had to move into a developmental approach, whereas teaching starts much more from a strongly interventionist teaching developmental approach and has only had to sort of recognise rights as a sort of a later sorts of things. And that continues operating, I think, through local government and through youth work and through schools.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is that tension sometimes in local government in terms of, again, youth workers having an idea that our principal client is young person and our work is young people centric. And I think what's moved around that is that we also are accountable to local government. And I think, as I said, within local government, that is the whole basis of local government youth work. It's about young people being involved in civics, young people being involved in the decision-making of council, young people being able to be enmeshed in their communities and being active parts of their communities or even legitimate parts of their communities. Often because they don't vote, they get left off the agenda. But they're often the number one when councils run. They're often the number one issue that councillors want to look at. So
for reasons maybe which aren't always very positive, which are often those sorts of let's contain them, let's prevent trouble.
Yeah. Or punitive kind of approaches to issues that they perceive are around young people. And I suppose the role of youth work within local government is actually to move that in a different way. So the way we talk to our council is about the development of young people and the ages and stages of young people and beyond. So how we actually, what we need to build resilience in young people, what connections young people need to make, what kind of preventative strategies can we put in so that young people are buffered and strengthened. And again, maybe with education and again, young people using the community as part of their learning. We also use the community as part of their learning.
One of the things that I experienced in my time as a youth work educator was the fact that I personally very strongly believed in youth work as a developmental philosophy, that it was about education, it was about informal education, it was about individual potential and all that sort of thing. But I had to accept that most of my graduates would go to work in welfare-related jobs, because that's where the jobs were, directly or indirectly funded by the state government, the Department of Social Welfare, or whatever it became later called. And some of my graduates actually tried to change the culture of that department, and I think by and large they failed. But that's not a criticism of those people personally, it's a question of the strength of the whole system. So that's what I tried to balance over that time. I think it becomes increasingly difficult to do so, but it's pleasing to know that many of the graduates came out with that particular point of view, that they weren't about breeding a dependency culture, they weren't only about working on problems, they were about working with people and so on.
The thing with a lot of youth work is you can't get really concrete measures of outcomes. If you, Martti, did good work with a young person, it doesn't necessarily mean they won't suicide the next day. So suicide is not necessarily a bad outcome. The business of measuring outcomes is extremely difficult, and that's the point of strategies like CQI. We apply it, or I think we should apply it in our field, because it's about us doing the best we can to assess our outcomes. And a lot of it will be qualitative as well as quantitative assessment. And then to identify what it is we did that worked and was efficient and effective, and then work out how to do more of it. And if you look at youth work in developing countries, in South Africa, for example, where youth goes up to 35, it's about national development. It's about the development of people. And youth work should be about that too, because it's about the transition, you know, and it's about people moving to being independents and being, you know, becoming or being and becoming the next stage in what Australian society is. So that youth workers should be part of that too. It was only at the stage of the Kennett government that we started getting services and thinking focused on the problem, not on the solution. The solution is young people's development. It's not issue specific. You know, young people don't develop by getting a house. They don't develop by getting out of jail. They develop by developing, by the changes in how they interact with other people and in the control they have over their lives. And that's what youth work's been about for me all my career, and why even at my antique age I'm still passionate about it.
Adults run this world, in effect, can become unnecessarily too impatient towards young people in the community, you know, and start getting all worried when we see more than 3 young people. Oh man, there's a gang, or, you know, we should be worried about that. Where, you know, young people's natural position is to gather together. And we should be capitalising on that and putting youth workers amongst those gatherings to sort of harness the strength and the camaraderie in that group to actually give them opportunities. So relational, responsive and aspirational would be the 3 principles that are characteristics that I value and would like to see across the organisation wherever I go. What do I think is the level of understanding by government about the role of youth work? There's 2 ways to answer that. I think it's less these days than it was before. I think we often used to talk about youth culture and the role of young people and the young people in Australian society and where they fit. And it used to be more of a wider community discourse, but now, you know, you don't get those sort of discussions happening, certainly in the mainstream. I don't know if everyone's locked down in their, you know, computers and sort of texting and Instagram, sociograms and all sorts of things. But we've lost that sort of importance of talking about that group of people in our community as not only a sense of sort of well, often it's talked about a sense of fear with that group, you know, young people doing this, that and the other, but we're not even probably talking about, you know, the great, where's youth culture going? And, you know, we used to be great monitors of youth culture or commentators. Certainly what rates in the Catholic cares or the Catholic-based organisations or the other church-based organisations or the Anglican-based organisation is, a generosity of spirit, a sense of, you know, understanding about that person's journey, a sense of sort of, and I think a sense of service about how can we assist and help. And I think that's how, and I think that's, you know, it's been quite a difficult time for church-based agencies, because I think the duty of care to those children and young people have been breached, you know, in particular circumstances in the past. But I think what still runs strongly through that, and the reason why a number of these organisations are still delivering youth work, is because, you know, some of those cultural principles of compassion and care and response are still very much evident very quickly when you walk into an organisation. You feel it, you see it, and you know that young people are experiencing it.
I think local government has actually always had an idea of being for all young people, and then people within different local governments have said, we're here for all young people. We run some universal programs, but the bulk of our programs is for disadvantaged young people or young people who are disengaged in education.
But it would seem also, however, that sense of organisation, there was much more focus about being a youth worker that became diluted through a period of time, through people who saw themselves as mainly, say, health workers or education workers and less as generalist youth workers. So there's that tension later on, which I think undermines some of the work about holistic youth advocacy work. Yeah. Is that how you read it later on?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And maybe because there were less people who are in that kind of participation movement or youth advocacy movement or even again young women's movement or working with ethnic young people.
There were a number of the organisations, and these tended to be the larger, more formal, traditional organisations who struggled with the ideas of participation. So that Scouts, Guides, the Wise and things like that became the subject for a range of in-services and training work through 86 at least, which was spinning off from that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true.
Was local government ahead of those, do you think?
I think some local governments were. Again, I don't know. I think a lot of youth workers were in local government, but there were also people in the community sector, in the legal sector, and people who had a youth work overlay rather than just youth workers. So, like teachers, like legal workers.
I think things like Scouts and Guides and all the uniformed and not uniformed and free and restricted youth organisations do have lots of impact on young lives, and then they increase the cohesion of our community. You know, so if you look at youth work broadly like that, I think there are lots of impacts. Professional youth work doesn't always do terribly well, I think. Nourishing the community-based things that enable the normal young people to develop and be active participants in their community.
This is Roger.
And Vicky. Shouting out to our friends in Estonia. Hello.
Tell them folk.
Tell them.